Bethesda Game Studios is an interesting anomaly. On one hand, they have crafted some of the most well-regarded and beloved games of all time, like Morrowind and Oblivion. But on the same token, some of their recent entries, like Fallout 76 and Starfield, have tarnished their reputation greatly. But it was their 2011 title, The Elder Scrolls Skyrim, that truly cemented their legacy in gaming for most. A game so remarkable that it set the tone for RPGs for an entire decade afterward, and one that still is talked about to this day, being one of the most popular games to make videos on of all time. But what makes Skyrim so influential isn't amazing writing or quest design, both of which are exceptionally poor in many ways and why I personally find the game boring, but instead, it's the world. From the ground up, Skyrim was designed to allow players to go practically anywhere. The common saying of, if you can see it, you can go there, was popularized originally by this title. And this means no matter how tall the mountain, no matter how far the river, or how impossible the underground bioluminescent dungeon felt, it was accessible. And I think this is the key ingredient of Skyrim that made it so impactful for the time and why it gave an unparalleled sense of exploration. While many games before, like Ultima, Zelda, or Grand Theft Auto, had attempted open worlds, Bethesda with Skyrim in many ways perfected the formula and made it more accessible for newer gamers too. Instead of overly complex stat trees and RPG mechanics, Skyrim took a simplified Ultima design approach where your skills and abilities leveled up as you used them, meaning you could tailor-make builds around a magic-wielding sorcerer who also was a great blacksmith, or a smooth-talking thief who hides in the shadows. The system was less rigid and class-focused and allowed players to roleplay by simply doing things, instead of relying solely on a stat sheet and level-up screen to dictate who they were. On top of this too, Skyrim leaned all the way into Radiant quests, procedurally generated encounters that could go on forever, giving players small objectives to do, meaning playtime on the title was often hundreds or even thousands of hours for players that had never even touched an RPG before. There were dungeons to find cool loot in, dozens of towns to meet people and take on quests, and some truly memorable side stories like talking with a dog that takes you on a journey with an evil Daedric lord. Whereas other titles at the time were going more hardcore, like Dark Souls, Skyrim was laying the groundwork for how to make an RPG that everyone could play. I even remember as a kid that my sister, who at the time I couldn't convince to play any games at all no matter how hard I tried, literally put more hours into Skyrim than I did. That was the kind of spell that this title was putting on people. And when you combine that with the fact that it was released with full mod access through the Creation Engine mod kit to the public, it's no wonder that Skyrim has gone on to be one of the most modded and played games of all time. And in a way, it's these mods that gave life to Skyrim in a way that so few other titles have achieved. Even over a decade later now, there are still hundreds of new mods being worked on for Skyrim that range from entire graphical and gameplay overhauls to multi-part and fully voice-acted side quests that are even better than anything you can find in the main game, all for free. The community around the game and modding too has grown to such a great size that popular memes like taking an arrow to the knee or Fusaroda have broken into the mainstream, proving just how influential this title was for so many in their youth. So again, while I have always, even as a kid when it first came out and I was so excited for it since Oblivion was my favorite game of all time, thought that Skyrim was beyond overrated and bad in many, many ways, it's impossible to ignore the greater impact and influence it had on the gaming industry. A title that practically rewrote how to make RPGs for a decade afterward, and showed that focusing on creating worlds with believable NPCs and locales was just as important for most people as good writing and storytelling. But for our next influential title, we need to turn to a type of game we haven't dived into yet. One that was so influential, it quite literally changed how and why we play games, birthed entire new industries, and gave a single gaming company the power to monopolize a market. If you watch any modern gaming presentations nowadays, it seems like every other title is a so-called Souls-like. Games that live and breathe the philosophy of challenging but fair combat, strange Cthulhian worlds and lore, and certain design language that all stems from one very influential game. Dark Souls. You see, back in February of 2009, From Software, the creators of Dark Souls, released their first foray into the new genre known as Demon Souls. But while Demon Souls was an interesting title with a lot going for it, the real Souls formula wouldn't be truly refined until Dark Souls in 2011. The game features an action RPG hybrid system of sorts which was directed by famous game designer Miyazaki. Combat focused on deliberate and even sometimes slow-moving attack animations that could literally kill the player in one hit, but always gave them a chance to react and overcome the challenge no matter the cost. Bosses were unique and varied, including grotesque appendages that would swoop around the battlefield as you had to roll and dodge around endlessly, poking in shots with your sword when given the chance. On top of this all too, the world of Dark Souls was unlike any other game around the time. The level design made you feel isolated and confused, with twisted maps and hundreds of hidden shortcuts that linked to larger regions, some of which players needed to do ridiculous things like hitting doors dozens of times to randomly unlock. Or in other words, not only was the combat not for the faint of heart, but the entire experience was hardcore. Whereas in other games before, lore and world building was spoon-fed to the player, in Dark Souls there was a more minimalistic storytelling approach, where players themselves had to piece together the plot and meaning through things like item descriptions and subtle tells in bosses' demeanor, along with strong environmental storytelling that implied so much more. In every way imaginable, Dark Souls was set as the antithesis of games of the time, trying to make things more difficult for the player rather than easy and streamlined. It sounded crazy at the time. After all, why would players want to struggle? But as it turns out, Miyazaki and FromSoft were right. Gamers flocked to the new title in small numbers at first, but quickly grew into a cult of sorts that sang its praises. And with each Dark Souls and coming Souls title from Software after this, things only got more and more popular. Until the release of Elden Ring in 2022, which cemented From Software as one of the biggest and most celebrated game companies in the world, and the Souls-like formula as one of the most popular. But none of this acclaim would have been possible without the original Dark Souls. In many ways, the game that started it all after the first attempt from Demon Souls. And the impact this title has had on the greater industry cannot be undersold. Entire series like Nioh or Salt and Sanctuary borrowed mechanics from Dark Souls like the bonfire and checkpoint system, and the ethos of making games that are hard has bled over into the entire industry. So much so that nowadays it feels like every single game is trying to be like Dark Souls. We have titles including Lies of P, Black Myth Wukong, Lords of the Fallen, Duskbloods, and so many more. Each of these includes a very dark and mysterious world, hard to understand or esoteric lore, and combat systems that all aim to iterate on what Dark Souls made originally. It showed that the broader gaming audience does like a challenge, and that gamers aren't just babies that need to be spoon-fed everything in the easiest way possible. A title that showed beyond a shadow of a doubt that the gaming industry and gamers are getting more hardcore and want experiences that make us work for it. It's the same reason I think immersive sims and complex narratives in games will grow in popularity too, but Dark Souls is the title that ushered in this revolution. And while I personally don't really like Souls-like design and philosophy all that much, if I'm being honest, I do think that the genre has had an astounding impact and influence on history. And Dark Souls is without a doubt, for my money, the most important game in that equation. The type of title so influential that it not only changed everything for one game studio, but all of games in general. And speaking of industry-altering games from 2011, we have one more from one of the most iconic developers of all time. As the early 2000s continued on, there were many more influential games that were released. Things like Shadows of the Colossus in 2005, Wii Sports in 2006, or BioShock and Mass Effect in 2007. But while all these games surely made an impact, it wasn't until 2011 that we finally had another year that was home to 3 great games that didn't just make an impact, but genuinely had a massive influence on the gaming industry and culture. And the first of these 3 games we need to talk about is maybe the biggest one ever created, Minecraft. Originally conceptualized as a cave game in 2009, Minecraft for 2 years went through a sort of iterative process via its creator Notch until its full release in November of 2011. By this point, the game had already garnered an impressive community of over 4 million players, but with the full release, things were about to get much more insane. And to start, the actual gameplay on offer was simple and easy to understand. Players spawned on a randomly generated map of blocky textures and trees, of which they could also destroy or build back, all situated in a universe with a day and night cycle, where at night, creepy monsters would come out in the dark and try to kill you in your house. It was a basic yet addicting gameplay loop, and one not quite like any other game out there. And the craziest part was, this small little indie title made by a single man was about to give birth to one of the biggest gaming revolutions ever. Because you see, the secret behind Minecraft is that it isn't all about the combat or world, it's about the creativity. The ability to literally destroy or create anything in front of you was and is still amazing to this day. And because Notch included things like redstone, which acts like real-world electricity, players could create working doors, garages, and even in one case, an entire computer within a game being played on a computer. The fact that the title even allowed for things like this caused the game to explode, now selling over 350 million copies as of 2025 worldwide, making it the highest selling video game of all time by a well over 100 million copy margin. And for decades now, players have spent hundreds, even thousands of hours on private servers creating literal world-sized megastructures or recreations of famous popular ones in our real world one-to-one. Countless YouTube and streaming careers too were launched off the back of the game, with thousands of different communities popping up all over the place focusing on building, memes, and just having fun in custom games. In a way, Minecraft has become more than just a game and is now an actual platform, one that was sold to Microsoft in 2014 and made Notch a literal billionaire. It's one of those titles that is just so easy to go back to every year too, checking out any new features and additions while just taking it at your own pace and creating whatever your heart desires. And at the time, it showed the industry that you didn't have to have a AAA budget and a huge team size in order to find success. Minecraft was made by a single man on a whim in his free time, and went on to eclipse entire studios in the process. It's given hope and inspiration to so many indie developers nowadays who credit their passion originally to Minecraft, and now it's common every year to see multiple games from even single developers which garner huge sales and glowing review scores. A game that a kid or adult alike could love, one that the entire family can play together, and an experience that is only as limited as your own creativity. It's no wonder that Minecraft found so much success and had such a profound impact on the industry. Even now, memes, communities, and the broader gaming culture as a whole owes so much to Minecraft, and I can't even imagine a world now where it didn't exist. As they say, a rising tide raises all boats, and Minecraft from 2011 was that tide, one that has not receded ever since. But Minecraft wasn't the only influential title from 2011, because our next game was so important that practically every series nowadays is trying to copy its success. Originally conceptualized as a hybrid building and sandbox game where players would craft and build defense against monsters, Fortnite is without a doubt one of the most influential games ever made. Its original gameplay mode, known as Save the World, launched to paid early access in July of 2017. It was a fun game for sure, sporting a third-person perspective, interesting gameplay, and a unique building mechanic where players could craft walls and structures on the fly, but honestly, it wasn't taking the world by storm. Yet. Because you see, it wasn't Fortnite's original inception, but rather its second, which would change the world. Due to the recent popularity and rise of PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, which was blowing up on Steam and around the world, Epic Games came up with an idea to save Fortnite. Rather than continuing to iterate upon their base defense game, they immediately pivoted and threw all the resources they could at shifting Fortnite into something new, a battle royale. Debuted in September of that same year after just a few short months, a free-to-play version of Fortnite that was set to take on PUBG was released. and within 2 weeks, it had 10 million players. Just 1 year later, over 125 million. Fortnite wasn't just a success, it was a phenomenon. Gamers from around the world, no matter what genre you were into before, were flocking to the title. And people who had never even played games or had been away from them for years were suddenly enveloped by the craze. I distinctly remember being in college around the time, and literally every one of my friends from my childhood and in college alike playing every single day. Without exaggeration, hundreds of different calls with people I hadn't spoken to in years, all coming together to try out this new game that pitted 100 players together all in a lobby, fighting against one another, trying to win a battle royale. And in these early days, before players were good at building, those rare wins were unreal. The amount of hype and satisfaction as you and friends held up in a house with shotguns trying to face off against the final team was exhilarating, and took the formula PUBG had introduced to the world along with H1Z1 and perfected it. Fortnite had a Pixar-like aesthetic that everyone could love, a whimsical world that beckoned you in, and the unique mechanic of being able to build on the fly on top of being a battle royale, which set Fortnite apart from its competition and guaranteed early success. But Fortnite's influence doesn't just come from its wider appeal and large player base. It comes from what it did to the broader industry too. For example, after Fortnite, dozens of new studios tried to make live service games and failed, while others reached great heights adopting a similar Fortnite model of using battle passes with cosmetics to generate revenue. Even more impressive than all of this, though, are the strides that Fortnite has made as a platform. Now, years later, still one of the biggest games in the world, Fortnite and Epic Games are frequently hosting in-game concerts, events, and reveals where thousands of players can all come together at once, for example in 2019, to watch Marshmello play a live 10-minute show. In this specific example, over 10 million players attended to watch live in-game while it happened. Feats like this aren't just impressive, they're world-altering. Fortnite in a way cemented the fact that games are the biggest entertainment medium out there. Whereas decades ago titles like Pac-Man, Super Mario, Zelda, or Grand Theft Auto grew the industry in spades, Fortnite quite literally took us to the top of the food chain along with Minecraft and Roblox. The type of game that forever changed what a game could be, and ushered in new popular live service tropes that to this day stand strong. And that isn't even to mention the impact Fortnite had on gaming media. Streaming on platforms like Twitch honestly owes its popularity in large part to the growth and explosion of Fortnite, which saw streamers like Ninja collaborating with famous musicians like Drake with over 600,000 people watching live. On top of this too, Fortnite has created countless millionaires like Booga who have won big competitions for millions of dollars in prize money and gone on to be sponsored by some of the biggest brands in the world. Hell, even I originally started my content creation side hustle streaming Fortnite on Twitch. It's what made me eventually get into making videos again on my YouTube channel after trying it as a kid, and it's why I'm here making things like this nowadays for you guys. And really, it just can't be overstated how much of an effect Fortnite has had on not just Epic Games and their ability to monopolize the gaming engine market with Unreal Engine 5, but also its broader reach on gaming and just general culture. Maybe more than any game before or since, Fortnite truly left a resounding influence on the world and changed the course of history in a way that no one saw coming. But Fortnite isn't the last influential game on my list, because there's one more left, one very special to my heart that I think given time will prove to have truly been a pivotal title. On any list like this about the most influential games of all time, funnily enough, the hardest ones to pick are the last. Because you see, the impact and reach of games is seldom truly understood until many years after their inception. Some titles that at the time seemed insignificant proved to be instrumental, and others that were popular for the time ended up barely making a splash in the bigger picture when it was all said and done. But in the case of Cyberpunk 2077, while it did only come out 5 years ago as of writing this, in December of 2020 specifically, its impact on the industry I think will be talked about for decades to come. not only because of its masterful storytelling, heart, and amazing world building, but because it revealed to the world some of the harshest and most fascinating truths that will send reverberations down the industry for years to come. For those of you who have been watching my channel for a while now, you know that Cyberpunk 2077 is my favorite game of all time. Nowadays, it feels like a fairly popular opinion to have, but if you were playing during its initial release, it was anything but. On last generation consoles specifically, Cyberpunk was buggy, barely managed to hit 25 FPS in most scenes, was riddled with issues, and nigh on unplayable for most. For me specifically, as someone who played from day one, I will argue till the day I die that it was not nearly as bad as people online made it seem, but regardless of all of that, the damage had been done. Millions of players online were in uproar over the fact that the once beloved studio that made The Witcher, CD Projekt Red, was now on the back foot, deceiving customers and providing a subpar product. It got so bad, in fact, that PlayStation even offered full refunds for anyone who had purchased the game and completely removed the title from their service for a short period while patches were made. By every metric imaginable, Cyberpunk 2077 was a disaster, one that, while high selling, was ruining the reputation of a once trusted developer. But you see, the true legacy, and by extension, the true influence of Cyberpunk now, is just how powerful of a comeback story it was and what it can tell us about the future of this industry. For well over a year after the release of the game, online almost any discussions would be met with vitriol, all while a small band of believers still loved the game, explaining that it had amazing writing, characters, storytelling, and world building, but the world just wouldn't listen. That was at least until 2 years later, when in September of 2022, Edgerunners, an anime set in the world of Cyberpunk 2077, was released on Netflix. This anime had come at the tail end of tons of patches and free updates from the Cyberpunk team that had slowly been fixing the game. And the Netflix special proved to be so popular that millions of old and new players alike fell in love with the universe and wanted to come back to try the game again. Patch 2.0, the biggest in Cyberpunk's history, released around this time as well, and these two strategically timed products in conjunction lit a fire under the fans of the series. Day after day, more and more people were coming back and loving the game, now seeing it for all that it did great and not the mistakes it had made. And on top of this truly heroic redemption story, only a short time after, the Phantom Liberty DLC for the game was released and was met with monumental praise and acclaim. And with that, for many, Cyberpunk 2077 finally became the game that they were always hoping for, one that could match the excitement that so many had for the title on its original announcement. The thing is though, for me, Cyberpunk 2077 is without a doubt my favorite game ever, and obviously thus one of the most influential for my own personal tastes. But even outside of my own bias, I think that this redemption arc will go down in the history of games as one of our biggest lessons. A lesson that no matter how much hate a game receives, no matter how many memes or threads are created to mock it, if you truly have created something special, it will always find a way to live on in the minds of people forever.